Betty Okero. I work for an organization, the CSO Network, as the team leader. CSO Network is working in Western Kenya. We've got programs across both Nyanza and Western Province. We work on issues around women's economic empowerment, issues around governance, rule of law, focusing on women, but also looking at issues around women and land, working with the county government on issues around governance, development, accountability, and the strengthening of community support, facilitation, and participation in county government processes. The charity organization is actually a product of the NGOs Council. At the time, which was way back in 2002, the NGO Council was looking to be able to identify networks that could work with them. So it was initially established as a regional network of the NGO Council. But then around 2006, 2007 and 8, there was massive turbulence that took place at the NGO Council, a whole reorganization of leadership, and it became untenable for networks to be able to work because of the transition in terms of leadership. And so at this level, one of the things that was asked is, so do we still want to operate? And we said, yes, it is good that it should continue to operate. So we retained the name, even though we are not, a membership sort of, the traditional form of membership where people are paying members fees and all. So we don't do that. Instead, what we do is we establish and support the networks that are thematic in nature. So you'll find that we have worked on with the water and sanitation thematic network. We have worked with now like how to strengthen survivors networks, how to be able to look at governance and access to justice networks. So that way it becomes easy for us to be able to use the platform of networking as a basis of strengthening movements around thematic areas. So we've had conversations with survivors around themselves, their lives. What has changed from 2008, because we are looking and working with survivors of post-election violence in 2007, 2008. And we continue to ask the question, what has happened after that day? And the journey of healing for them is part of the conversations that we continue to have. So there's looking at survivors and how they are managing, and looking at their experiences and asking ourselves how to take those experiences and turn them into policy changes that can support any other survivor who comes in afterwards. So these survivors have been a sort of platform for which we have been asking for numerous changes around how the country handles sexual and gender-based violence survivors in whatever area, because we recognize that the magnitude and the impact are different, but nonetheless, the impact sometimes continues to remain the same, whether it is at community level, at family level, at societal level, and even at institutional level. And I talk about this within the context of the state response, protection, management. And if you look at the cycle of violence that we continue to see around elections or when there's political turmoil, the way the state responds and the way victims are, I suppose one would say, treated by the state and also at community level continues to be almost the same. Yes, changes have been made in terms of how we respond, but then we continue to say that victims' conversation, especially victims of survivors of the election violence, they continue to be the ones that guide, because we are talking about 15 years and we have documented their process all the time. And we use that process to be able to show there is still so much more that needs to be done. There is still something that has got to be done. And by using those experiences, we are able to see how to change policy, how to be able to put in place legal frameworks that support them. But most of all, we are holding the county, the government accountable for the commitments they made when we had the National Accord and Reconciliation Act, where we are talking about agenda number 2 in terms of compensation and restoration of those who are affected by the violence. It's the fact that, despite everything, they still have to deal with what they were dealing with in 2008. that they're still not recognized by the state, but they're also not recognized even at their own local level. And when I say recognition, I mean that to the extent whereby if their husbands are no longer there, they're not considered a member of the family. So they're still being thrown out. They're not considered to be able to access the wealth, family wealth. And family wealth is land, having access to their land to be able to dig it. They are not considered as and recognized as groups that require affirmative action support so that they can take their children to school, given the challenges that they are facing where they've been banished. There is still no recognition in looking at their experiences to be able to shape how they're able to access services, how they can get health service delivery in healthcare, knowing that a number of them may have tested positive and there's nobody who's able to ensure that they have good nutrition. Or that they're considered to be able to provide food security in a way that they're able to benefit from all these seed programs that are given or the fertilizers that are given. All those things that we are giving as grants, the trainings, the bursaries that we see, the resources that are given to community members to run business, the trading spaces where they can be. There's no affirmative action that actually is able to consider them because they're not recognized even as being not different, but being a group that requires an extra support and an extra hand to be able to see how they can recover. The whole concept around restoration of survivors of sexual violence, especially from them, is not a concept that has been incorporated in policy documents so that there's a deliberate attempt to target them. Post-election violence cannot be a tired topic because it's not the violence in abstract. It's about human beings who suffered. It's about people who have got unfinished business in terms of justice. It's about people who were promised certain things by the government that they have not been able to follow up. The fact that we talk about it is a form of accountability. So it cannot be an exhaustive topic if the government's commitments have not been met. I think even when we carry out social audit, we carry out social audit based on commitments that were made in a conversation that you had with Kenyans, whether it's at the county level. Well, the Kenyan government had a conversation with Kenyans and especially survivors and victims and told them that I will end the violence. And when I end that violence, I will restore, I will compensate, I will rehabilitate. When you haven't done that, we can't stop asking you to be able to do that because it hasn't happened. So there's nothing about being tired about it. It's about saying that we should be ashamed that the government commitment 15 years down the line has not been met. And that for some reason, because we continue to hold the government accountable by saying that they have not met their commitment, people say it's a tired conversation. I think for those people who say it's a tired conversation, is also another form of trying to deny the survivors an opportunity to be able to say, you owe me. If you said no one left behind, I'm behind and I need to be able to get back to the place where the other people who were like me were restored. And we shouldn't have to be able to plead or beg for that recognition. It should be something that the government must recognize that it has not been achieved and it must be achieved because it's stopping the healing for people. It's stopping what we're calling the dignity of accessing justice by consistently asking about it like it's a favor, like it's something that the government is doing on kubaitika. It wasn't that. And we have to continue to tell the government that this is a state responsibility and obligation because the people who were harmed as a result of an absence of government support in protection and defense, which is their mandate and responsibility. It's important for us to recognize as we continue to have this conversation that there are so many people who are still asking and demanding for justice and accountability. That is one. But second, even as we demand for justice and accountability, we must be able to see a transformation that is taking place in terms of policy, in terms of service delivery, in terms of the targeting that we want. Because Whereas our focus has been on this group of amazing, resilient women, we continue to say that their conversation should be able to influence policy and change, because at that time we said it should never happen again. So we use their stories to ensure that it doesn't happen again, so that any other person who becomes a victim finds that there's a foundation that has been created